indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So we have about 30 whole seconds, but Sherry, if you want to go ahead and come up, and then we will gavel in this morning. It always goes faster when I'm here than when the mayor's here. He just times it impeccably.
All right, so I just wanted to say good morning, and I am here. I'm Sherry Watson, Director of Retirement Services, and I just am here to give you an update on one of the city's most valuable assets that we have. And as an overview to the pension plan that we have and the duties that we are responsible for, this is what our presentation will be about. It's our duties, plans governance, the trustee fiduciary role, and actuarial science. The actual pension plan contributions that we have currently, our workforce trend, the pension assets, engagement and education that we've provided, the general employees pension plan trustees, retirement services staff, and our contact information. Our duties and responsibilities, we administer, of course, numerous meetings throughout the year. Last year, we had 16 that we coordinated, including pension meetings and investment committee meetings. We had those virtually and in person. We communicate and coordinate all service providers. We have 41 money managers in our pension plan, and we coordinate them to all of our meetings. Member communications, we send those out to all of our general employees. We send out numerous communication events throughout the year. We process benefits for all of our retirees for the general, and we do work with fire and police as well, but we mainly process the general employees. We had 338 retirements and refund actions last year, and this is through fiscal year end 22. We have to maintain all of our electronic records in case of any state audits, anything that may come from the state. Last year and previous years, we've had 0 deficiencies on any of our actuary and audits. We maintain all the plan financials, payment of all invoices through our money managers, as well as our financial consultants. And we input record keeping into our program here at the city, which is PeopleSoft. And of course, we pay the benefits to the retirees. Our plans governance. We follow all IRS guidelines with regards to ERISA. We are not an ERISA account, but we do follow those IRS guidelines. We follow any local ordinances that are passed, as well as all collective bargaining agreements without all the unions here at the city. We have an investment policy statement that kind of oversees our pension plan, and we follow that guideline when it comes to investments. We also have a rule that we follow the Florida Commission on Ethics, and of course we follow the state of Florida Retirement Division chapters 185, 175, 112, and 119. The trustee fiduciary role. We have 3 pension plans here at the city. We have a general pension plan, a fire pension plan, and a police pension plan. Each one of those pension plans has their own board of trustees. But no matter what they vote on or what they want to change or amend, it all has to come to you guys for final approval of any changes to any of the pension plans. The actuarial science is kind of basic. Contributions plus the investment returns has to equal all benefit payments and plan expenses. So if there's any changes to that, that's when contribution rates would be altered. Contributions. Our legacy plan is Plan A. That is for all employees that were hired prior to 2003. Plan B came into effect October of 2003. So those 2 plans were here for the longest time, and they have the same contribution rates on the employee side of 7.83. Plan C was effective February of 2012, and any new hire that comes in will be hired under Plan C. The pension, of course, is not as lucrative as the legacy plans that we had, so they only contribute 3.08%. The city does contribute 16.67% across the board. And this is our workforce trend. I kind of wanted to give you a comparison of 40 years ago. And you can see the huge difference that we had. In 1985, we had about 1,200 plan members active. And now, of course, I'm going to give you 2 years that you can compare of 2021 and 2022. So you can see that we've had a few more people retire from being active, but you can see that we've hired a few more active people than we did the prior year. But if you'll also note, the difference is the drop people, it has gone down. And that's what's going to happen continuing because Plan C has a different age penalty involved with it. So those people entering drop, it will slowly decrease. On the contribution side, in 2021, we had about 15 million in contributions for the employees and the city. And then last year, it went down to 11 million. On the retired member side, in 1985, we only had about 270 retirees. Fast forward to 2021, and we had 1,300 retirees. And last year, we had 1,351 retirees. So you can see people are getting more at the age where they can retire now. But remember, Plan C has changed that age of retirement that you can fully retire without an age penalty, and that age is 62. On the benefits paid, you can see how those benefits, more people are retiring, but the actual annual benefit does decrease because the pension, of course, is a little bit smaller than it used to be with the legacy plan of Plan A. So on the benefits side, 2021, we had 41 million paid out in benefits. In 2022, because we had more retirees, we had 43 million paid out. But look at the average annual benefit. In 2021, it was around 34,000. And in 2022, it's gone down to 32,000. So that's what's going to start happening now. The average age of our retiree is age 69, and they had about 21 years of service when they retired. Any questions on that before I move on? Pension assets. This is our pension plans. This is the greatest asset to me that we have here, besides our employees. So on the employees' general side, this is as of 9/30/2022. This is what our actuary report was given, has stated per what they gave to us. In fiscal year 2022, we had about 663 million, almost 664 million. And the rate of return, we were down last year. It was down 12.77. But as of April, it came back. So the market's fluctuating with the rates of return, as all of our retirement accounts are. But right now, we were currently at 13.04%, and that was as of April. On the police officer's pension, it was around 154 million, and the rate of return was down 13.13%, but currently they're up 10.9. On the firefighters, their plan is 110 million, and they were down also at 15%, but they're currently up to 12% now. On the defined contribution, which is the 401A and the 457, and remember this was as of 9/30, we had 125 million in assets. In our retiree health savings plan, we had 4.5 million in assets. So the total benefits as of 9/30 last year was a little over $1 billion. So that's huge. And so we're maintaining that $1 billion, but it's $1,058,000. So any questions on that one? Yes, sir.
Can we,
Yes, ma'am.
y'all make a note, we'll do questions at the end.
There were just so much on the panels,
Yeah.
I just wanted to make
We'll
sure.
circle back. We'll
Yes,
just
ma'am.
mark it.
Engagement and education. We set up seminars for our active employees to attend. Retirees can attend these as well. They're very informative. We have our 457 representative come into the city and actually meet with our employees one-on-one if they want to, and they are here at every new hire orientation. We also have Social Security representatives come into us. We do not contribute to Social Security. However, with our newer employees that are coming in and those newer people that are retiring as well, they've had some job in their career where they did contribute to Social Security. So we have that representative talk to all of us. The last one we did, we had about 70 participants in that. So it was really informative because we don't have Social Security here, so that's something we would not think about normally. The General Employees Pension Plan Trustees, Tori Bombard is our chairman. She just received a great promotion to AGM at Lakeland Electric. Rick Lilliquist is a retiree from here. Chris Diaz is an entrepreneur. He's been on our board for about a little over 3 years now. Ruffin Gray is also a retiree from the city. He just joined this year. Brendan Hahn is a tax accountant. He joined us this year. Jeff Stearns is our treasurer, or city treasurer, and Jim Studiali is also a City of Lakeland retiree. My staff, 2 of them are on vacation today, so it's that time of year, but Carla Bibby is with me, and she is our pension benefits analyst. Carrie Whistler, who's my right arm, she is our specialist. She's on vacation. And Tony Thompson just joined us from HR. She's our assistant, but she had a vacation day today. And Paula Sosa is here with us today, but she's a little under the weather, and because of the tight quarters, I asked her what she felt like, if she felt comfortable, and so she's back at our office. She's actually on the finance team, but she helps us with all of our programming and reports, and we're very thankful for her. If you need to contact us, we're at cityoflakeland.gov. You can look up retirement services, or you can just send us an email at retirementservices@lakeland.gov. And our phone number, of course, is 863-834-8765.
Thank you, Sherry.
Questions?
Commissioner Simmons.
Yes. How many retirees do you currently have? Excellent presentation, by the way.
Thank you, sir. We have a little over 1,300 retirees. Yes, sir.
And how do you communicate with them, and how frequently do you communicate with them?
We have an open door policy. They come in whenever they want. Lakeland is still their employer, they feel like. We send them numerous emails. They can call any one of us. One of us will answer their phones. We also have a group for them. It's called the City of Lakeland Association of Retirees, COLAR. If you ever hear that term, that's what that means. They do participate at our meetings. Somebody is there at every one of our meetings to represent them. So we listen to them very hard. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And if I may, Commissioner, that's similar. You hear us talking about the Employees Association for the general employees. It's an informal group, but it does allow them to collaborate and represent themselves and their interests.
Commissioner Music?
Yeah, that was actually my question as well, but just as from an education to me standpoint, you know, if we rewind the clock, at some point this fund started with what? Right? I mean, it starts with zero. There was money coming because obviously you're going to, you know, you think about an insurance policy and things like that. You know, they, Allstate or whoever has had money for generations to be able to pay for this. How did that early system work?
1963 is when they made us a separate part of the charter, and they had contributions coming in at that time. Of course, it has been amended a few times, but that's when it started. Yes, sir.
Other questions for? Okay, Sherry, that was great. Thank you so much. It was
Thank you
very
so much.
thorough, and we appreciate your team very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, now we'll move into our proclamations. If we can have, we're going to first do the 33rd anniversary of the American with Disabilities Act. Here to accept the proclamation is Cheryl Brown, President and CEO of Lighthouse for the Blind and Low Vision. Thank you, Mr. James. Thank you all so much for being here. Whereas more than 1.5 billion people worldwide are individuals with disabilities, and whereas in the United States it is estimated that more than 60 million people, or 1/5 of the population, are individuals with disabilities. Whereas for much of our nation's history, individuals with disabilities had little protection from discrimination in housing, employment, and community participation. And whereas in 1990, in keeping with our nation's support of protections against all forms of discrimination, the United States Congress passed the Americans with Disabilities Act, known as ADA. And whereas President George H.W. Bush signed this significant legislation to have an effective date of July 26, 1990, whereas in January of 2017, the City of Lakeland created the Lakeland Alliance for Accessibility to provide citizens and professionals with the opportunity to work together to improve the quality of life for individuals with disabilities in the city. And whereas the City of Lakeland remains committed to valuing and serving all of its citizens and visitors with disabilities. Now, therefore, Mayor Bill Mutz of the City of Lakeland, and on behalf of our entire commission, do hereby remind our citizens that July 26, 2023 is the 33rd anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act in Lakeland, Florida. So thank you so much for being here. Just as a personal note, I worked with Best Buddies International for 12 years serving people with intellectual disabilities. So this is near and dear to my heart. But do you have a few words you'd like to say?
just want to thank the city for always being responsive to any needs or issues, and for recognizing the ADA, and also having a ADA coordinator. The position's vacant right now, and Greg is stepping in. You want to say anything, Greg? And, we meet in all agencies with disabilities, and anytime there's an issue, y'all are very responsive to addressing it, and I appreciate that.
Thank you so much. We'll take a picture. Thank you. Thank y'all so much. Please give them a round of applause for all their work. Our next proclamation is Buffalo Soldiers Day, which is July 17th, 2023. Here to accept the proclamation is Mr. Richard Wilder, President of the Florida Buffalo Soldiers. See you all. Good morning. I'm going to start reading. This one's a little more lengthy. Thanks for being here. Whereas on July 28, 1866, recognizing the contribution of more than 180,000 African American soldiers who fought to preserve the Union during the Civil War, the United States Congress established 6 regular Army regiments of black enlisted soldiers. Of those 6 units, the 9th and 10th Cavalry Regiments eventually became 2 of the most highly decorated units in American military history. Despite suffering the discrimination and the injustice that plagued all black Americans during that segregation era, the members of the 9th and 10th Cavalry Regiments served with pride and distinction. Today, we celebrate their outstanding legacy of service. And whereas organized in Greenville, Louisiana, and Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, respectively, the 9th and 10th Cavalry Regiments played critical roles in the development of the western United States. In addition to protecting settlers as they crossed the frontier via wagon trains and railroads, these skilled horsemen and soldiers assisted in constructing roads, forts, while pursuing cattle thieves and other outlaws. During a battle in 1867 near Fort Hays, Kansas, Cheyenne warriors remarked that the black American soldiers fought as fiercely and with as much strength as buffaloes. Hence, members of the 9th and 10th Cavalries proudly adopted the name Buffalo Soldiers as a badge of honor. And whereas July 28th commemorates annually the day we remember the courage, strength, and sacrifices of Buffalo Soldiers Day on their formation, the first regular Army regiments comprised of African American soldiers occurred on September 21st, 1866, 17 months after the end of the Civil War. Established by Congress, these regiments were the first peacetime all-black regiments in the regular U.S. Army. From 1879 to 1890, the Buffalo Soldiers earned the highest citations. And whereas the United States Congress Senate Joint Resolution 92 designated July 28, 1992 as Buffalo Soldiers Day and requested the President proclaim observance of that occasion. And whereas in 1898, the Buffalo Soldiers camped on Lake Wyre's North Shore for 3 weeks before proceeding to Cuba to fight in the Spanish-American War 124 years ago. A Buffalo Soldiers historical marker erected in 2019 is a recognized stop along the Florida Black Heritage Trail. And whereas in June 2013, in coordination with the Lakeland Juneteenth Rodeo, Doris Moore Bailey, Beverly M. Bailey, and the Juneteenth Committee educated horse riders about the Buffalo Soldiers Lake Wyre marker location and encouraged their reenactment. Doris Moore Bailey organized the first Buffalo Soldiers commemoration at the Lake Wyre Historic Site in 2015. Now, therefore, Mayor William Mutz, City of Lakeland, do hereby proclaim with the full enthusiastic support of its commission for July 28, 2023, to be officially regarded as Buffalo Soldiers Day here in the City of Lakeland. Would you like to say anything and introduce who you have with you today?
Yes, my name is First Sergeant H.L. Williams, and I have my grandson, Brother Travion Patterson, with me. We apologize to Mr. Richard and the Buffalo Soldiers, Florida, for not being able to be here this morning. But we thank the City of Lakeland for the support they have given us in this event. So we just thank each and every one for their support, and to God be the glory.
All right, start with the city picture first.
And now we have a big group coming up for Parks and Recreation Month, which will be July 17th, 2023. Here to accept the proclamation is Beth Sherling of Parks and Rec and Cultural Arts Department, Joey Paholski, campers and counselors of the city's Teen Adventure Service Camp. And just so you know that the teen campers have worked throughout our community these last few weeks this summer. They've helped serve Noah's Ark, Hollis Garden, Florida Presbyterian Homes, the City Nursery, Visti, Seven Wetlands, and Camp Blast. We're proud of y'all, and we love that you're giving back to the city. Thank you, Ms. Sherling and all the team. Y'all may want to stop. I'm going to start reading while you do that. I can put this. Can I put that down now? Yes. I see pickleball paddles. Whereas parks and recreation are an integral part of communities throughout our country, presenting life-sustaining services, and whereas parks and recreation impact mental health by increasing cognitive performance and well-being, alleviating illnesses, fostering the ability to reduce stress, providing mental relaxation, and inspiring people of all ages and backgrounds, and whereas parks and recreation encourage physical activities by providing space for popular sports, hiking trails, swimming pools, and many other activities designed to promote active lifestyles, and are a leading provider of healthy meals, nutritional services, and education, whereas parks, recreation, and cultural programs and educational activities such as after-school programs, youth sports, and environmental education, which are critical to childhood development, and whereas parks and recreation increase a community's economic prosperity through increased property values, expansion of the local tax base, increased tourism, the attraction and retention of businesses, and crime reduction. And whereas parks and recreation are fundamental to the environmental well-being of our community, fostering a sense of community, encouraging social cohesion, and promoting cultural diversity and inclusivity, parks and recreation are essential and adaptable infrastructure that makes our communities resilient in the face of natural disasters and climate change. Our parks and natural recreation areas ensure the ecological beauty of our community and provide a place for children and adults to connect with nature and recreate outdoors. And whereas the United States House of Representatives have designated July as Parks and Recreation Month, and the City of Lakeland recognizes the benefits of our parks, recreation, and cultural art resources. Now, therefore, Mayor William Mutz of the City of Lakeland, and on behalf of the entire City Commission, do hereby proclaim July as Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Arts Month in Lakeland, Florida. And look how nice y'all look. Y'all did that so much better than grown-ups. That is amazing. Can I hand you the proclamation to hold for a picture, and then I'm going to let you say a few words? Well, when we're... Yeah, not that you can stand up, and then we'll do a sign.
Tiara will appreciate that.
Yes, she will. Well, we're going to let Miss Beth Sherling talk for just a second.
Well, we're so thankful for the teens being here, but we of course want to thank the commission and really the community for making our jobs so wonderful. Always so appreciative. The theme this year for the National Park and Recreation Month is where community grows, and that is definitely true in Lakeland. So, and is there anything you wanted to say about your summer while you're up here?
I mean, our kids have really worked hard this summer. We spent a lot of time in the community making sure that it looks beautiful, and then also giving back to the people of the community, like the elderly and then the young kids, and then also Noah's Ark. So they did a great job, and we appreciate you having us here to acknowledge that.
All right. And you guys, congratulations on giving back to the community. That probably let you think about things that go on in Lakeland you may not have had any idea about. So we're always excited to see groups, and we're excited that our team leads them so well. So thank you for that. All right, now is your cue to kind of squat a little bit.
My first group is great. My second group, you're just going to kneel down a little. You don't have to get on the floor, because then there you go. There you go.
3, 2, 1.
All right. Great job, everybody.
All right, guys, have a seat where you were at the beginning, okay? Real quick. Seriously.
People to get organized. Do you see?
She's my spirit animal, getting that done. Okay, thank you all. Now we'll move into our regular agenda, and the first item we have is committee reports and related items. Municipal boards and committees met on Friday, July 14th, And Commissioner Madden will present that report to us.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. The Municipal Board Committee met in the LE Conference Room 1A and 1B. Commissioner Stephanie Madden, Chair, and Mayor Bill Mutz and Commissioner Sarah McCarley, members, were present. Commissioner Mike Music, Chad McLeod, Bill Reed, and Samuel Simmons were present along with staff. The meeting was called to order at 8:26 a.m., and the purpose of the meeting was to receive and act upon the following recommendations. For the Civil Service Board, there was a recommendation from HR and Civil Service Director Mark Farrington to reappoint Dr. Joy Perez to a second three-year term beginning October 10th, 2023, and ending October 9th, 2026. For the CRA Advisory Board, there was a recommendation from CRA Manager Valerie Farrell to appoint Ronald Roberts as a Midtown member to a three-year term beginning August 7th, 2023, and ending October 16th, 2026, and also a recommendation to appoint Jason Ellis as a downtown member to a three-year term beginning July 17th, 2023, and ending October 16th, 2026. Commissioner Sarah McCarley moved to approve the recommended appointments. Mayor Bill Mutz seconded, and the motion carried unanimously. As I always like to encourage people to go to the City of Lakeland website, there are applications, and you can always fill out an application. Even if the vacancy that you're looking for is not open, then we have your application on hand and can notify you when those open up. The open vacancies are as follows. The Affordable Housing Advisory Committee is looking for 3 members, one who is an employee within the jurisdiction, one who is engaged in the residential home industry, and one citizen who resides within the city limits. Also on the Civil Service Board, they are looking for 1 member. They must be over the age of 21, a registered voter, and live inside the Lakeland Electric Service Territory. For the Community Redevelopment Area Advisory Board, we need 2 members, one who owns property or a business who works in the Dixieland CRA district, and one in the Midtown CRA district. So I hope that if you're listening, that you'll go to our city website and look at all the opportunities that you have to get involved in our city government by volunteering your time on one of these boards or committees. The committee meeting on Friday adjourned at 8:28 a.m.
To approve?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the report? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the motion carries. This brings us to our approval of our consent agenda. That is any item that's listed with our asterisk on the agenda, including our committee minutes from utility, our commission minutes, as well as item 6B1 under city attorney. Do you have a motion to accept?
Move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Any discussion by the audience? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to our item number 1 on our agenda. There are no requests to appear from the general public. There are no equalization hearings. Therefore, we go into number 3, public hearings, B1, resolutions.
Thank you, Commissioner. The one resolution for consideration this morning is proposed resolution number 23-036, a resolution authorizing approval of a utility work by highway contractor master agreement between the Florida Department of Transportation and the City of Lakeland to enable Florida Department of Transportation contractors to perform work related to city-owned utility facilities located in and along Florida Department of Transportation's transportation corridor requiring relocation, construction, or modification, repealing Resolution 1672, making findings, providing an effective date.
Move to approve?
We have a motion to approve?
Second.
And we have a second. Discussion by commissioners. Any discussion from the audience? Seeing none, this is a roll call vote. Commissioner Simmons?
Aye.
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 Yes.
Motion carries unanimously. We'll move to C1, miscellaneous.
C1 is the second of 2 required public hearings for the adoption of the one-year action plan for the use of CDBG, that's a Community Development Block Grant, and Home Investment Partnership Program funds for the upcoming fiscal year. Mike Smith with the Housing Division is here to make a brief presentation.
Morning, Mike Smith, Housing Programs Manager, City of Lakeland. We presented the plan last month for the first hearing and had it open for public comment up until July 10th. We didn't have any major changes occur during that time. Our timelines are on here. We've already held our public meetings. This will be the last and final public meeting and hearing for the action plan. And once this is approved, we will take that and submit it to HUD, which is due by August 15th. And I just have a brief overview of the budget. The total budget, including a carryover of $400,000 from the previous year, is going to be around $1.7 million. The only things that changed on the proposed funding budget item lines for 23-24, where we added infrastructure as a line item. We typically have that in from year to year. We didn't have any projects last year, so it wasn't in our initial projections. But we did go ahead and add that in there. We anticipate a sidewalk project, most likely. And then we also have included in here our public service grant awardees that were recommended for the CDBG funds. And those are listed up there as well. And you can see the total budget still remains the same at that 1.7 million amount. And I will leave it open for any questions from the public or from commissioners. And we're just asking for your approval to go ahead and forward this on to HUD for approval of our action plan.
Do we have a motion to accept?
Question.
We'll have to have a motion.
Move to accept.
Thank you. Motion.
Second.
Motion is second. Yes, sir, Commissioner Simmons.
Okay, on the question, with regard to the public service grants, do you have any new organizations?
So we do get some new organizations. I believe the ones that were recommended for the CDBG funding are not any new ones that are on there right now. We also have some other public service awardees that get funding from the general fund as well, and those get approved along with the city's budget. So I think in that one, there were a couple of new applications, and it is something we consider. We like to try to award some funding to different organizations and not continue to just fund the same organizations over and over again. We like to see them moving forward, expanding, and the new organizations do get consideration. So I think there were maybe 3 or 4 new applications this year that we hadn't received in the past.
Thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Smith? Yes, Commissioner Reed?
Thank you. The surplus from last year, is that included in the 1.7 million?
There's a $400,000 estimated carryover, and we don't know the exact amount yet, but yeah, that's in that first slide there. That's what we're estimating the carryover to be, and that's basically our funding that we're using now. We've got projects underway. Some of our renovation projects are up. If it's a complete reconstruction, it could be up to $180,000 for the reconstruction. So we may be halfway through that project, so some of that funding will carry over, and we'll use that continually through those projects. But that's what we're estimating it as of right now.
These funds come from where to go into this program?
These are federal funds that we receive from our entitlements through the CDBG program and the HOME program.
Home program comes from the city?
The federal government. This is all federal funding.
Okay.
The CDBG and
I
HOME
was trying to
funding.
remember, I voted no against something similar to this, I thought. I went for the June meeting, but I'm not sure if it was, I was worried about some money going in where.
That was actually our ARPA funding, I believe, that came up at the same meeting we did our first hearing for this funding. That was a separate item. That was
Thank you
the,
for that clarification.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Commissioner Simmons?
Right, do these come through the state, then to the city? From the federal to the state, then to the city?
no, we're an entitlement community, so we receive this funding
Directly from the federal?
from the federal government, and this is the 49th year of this program, and so we've been receiving funding as an entitlement community for a while now.
Other questions? Any questions from the audience? Seeing none, this is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
you.
Thank you. Thank you for your good work, Mike. This is very thorough, the first time and this time, so thank you. All right, moving on. City Manager.
Thank you. I have 2 items for presentation, and then if I may, Mayor Pro Tem, I have one verbal following the 2 items. The first item that I have is regarding an approval of a request to negotiate an agreement for professional engineering and environmental consulting services for the Lake Bonnet Drainage Basin Flood Hazard and Debris Mitigation project. The city did go through a request for qualifications process seeking qualified firms to provide professional engineering and environmental consulting services for the project. 4 firms responded to the RFQ. There was a selection committee that was convened, and they evaluated each of the firms based on a set of pre-identified criteria. After review of the responses, the selection committee recommends that the city begin contract negotiations with the first-rate firm as presented in the item, and upon city commission approval. A negotiation agreement will include certain specified tasks. These tasks include an environmental assessment, feasibility studies, and constructability review, environmental permitting and value engineered design, public participation and outreach, program, project, and construction management, grant compliance, documentation, and reporting. The initial term of the agreement is for 6 years with up to 2 additional 1-year extension periods. The project, as you're aware, is federally funded through the State of Florida Department of Economic Opportunity Community Development Block Grant Mitigation Program subrecipient agreement dated back in October. Staff would recommend that the City Commission approve the request to negotiate the professional engineer and environmental consulting services, again, beginning with the first-ranked firm, and if those should fail, we will simply go to number 2, then number 3, then number 4, to negotiate these provisions as presented.
Move to approve.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Questions?
I've got a question.
Commissioner Simmons.
Let's see.
Come
My
on.
question is, does it take 6 years? Is it going to take 6 years to make this complete?
Will likely take 6 years. This is related to the almost $43 million grant that the city partnered with Bonnet Springs Park, for the mitigation of Lake Bonnet, and so it will be a long process.
That actually, I'm glad, Lori, you came up. Thank you. We missed you Friday. But thanks for being here. To that end, maybe you could give a broader view of the scopes, that we have 3 different steps in this really overarching program, and that might answer.
Sure. Lori Smith, Manager, Lakes and Stormwater Division. It's our division that'll be overseeing the contractors that implement the work. The first phase is feasibility studies and environmental. And those are federally required. We must do those steps before we can even start to go to construction. So that is scoped to take about 18 months. They're very thorough, and there's a lot of studies that need to be done. Those will then be submitted to DEO for approval. Once they approve that, we can move into the second phase, which would be the permitting and construction design phase, where we'll take from the feasibility studies the best concept plan and permit and design. And then the third phase will be construction. So we anticipate 6 years. That's the grant cycle. If we need more time, we are allowed to ask for an additional year twice.
What are you constructing?
We are constructing some flood relief downstream of Lake Bonnet, starting at Brunel Parkway and down to Wabash Avenue. So the concept right now, and it's only concept because we have to do the studies to make sure that it's constructible, but it could be anything from installing seawalls, doing stormwater diversion out of the Lake Bonnet drainage canal, deepening the canal, widening culverts underneath roadways. There's a lot of different potential opportunities there, and then doing actually some in-lake work, which will be excavating sediment out of the bottom of the lake to increase storage in the lake so that we can actually hold water back during severe storm events.
Nick, follow-up question. You mentioned that Bonnet Springs is a partner with us in this. What is their partnership role?
Was working with Bonnet Springs whenever the grant opportunity presented itself. The city then took the lead role in applying for the grant and receiving the grant, and will be the one managing the grant, but it will have a direct mitigation impact on Bonnet Springs, the water body, and the related adjacent park.
Are they contributing any money?
This particular task?
Right.
No.
Okay.
Have in the past. As part of our grant application, we took credit for some of the stormwater treatment and storage that Bonnet Springs built into their design on the park. They spent almost $9 million on stormwater control and treatment at the park, and because we were a partner, we were able to use that as leverage funds.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that clarification, Lori. Yes, Commissioner Madden.
Thank you, Lori. So just, I can't say it enough. I mean, usually we're signing contracts of money going out and things that we have to pay for. To be able to secure this grant for $43 million, to be able to not only, affect the park that we can go to, but improve the quality of life of so many of the residents who live in that neighborhood with the storm water and the flooding. Could you speak to, is it May Manor that would also be affected by this? It seems like when we were earlier when you and your team thinking about getting the grant, it was not just to improve the water at Bonnet Springs Park, but that entire area, and just looking kind of from a bird's eye view to say, how might we affect all of this from the stormwater and could you explain a little bit more, like just the comprehensive look that you look for $43 million? It sounds like a lot of money, but what are some of the things that you put into the grant that actually caused us to be able to be a recipient?
Because the grant was for disaster recovery, was the overarching requirement, that you had to utilize the grant in a low to moderate income community to improve safety going forward for potential disaster mitigation for future potential issues. So May Manor and several other mobile home parks that are immediately downgrading of Bonnet Springs, Lake Bonnet, flood every day in daily rains that we get in Florida. During severe storm events, there's risk to life and property because it just floods so much. They're kind of in a geographic bowl, and water will fill up before it's even able to move downstream because they're actually lower than their downstream level. So these low to moderate income neighborhoods will be directly affected by that, by making them more flood resilient. It will also have implications upstream because we'll be able to move water and store it in Lake Bonnet. So we're reducing flood potential upstream, and then even out of our immediate area, it will impact all the way down to the Hillsborough River, where we're able to divert floodwaters, and it'll help communities downstream.
Thank you. So I just did want to reinforce my praise of you and your team and just of our city staff. I know sometimes, we think about things in silos. So whether it's the private businesses thinking in a silo and thinking of government sometimes as an obstructor, or, they're the ones you have to pay the fee or get the permit that delays projects, or whether it's philanthropic events, nonprofits. And so what I find that is if you stay in a silo with whether you're a nonprofit or you're in business or you're in the government, you're limited. But when you work together and, forge these kind of partnerships, when you know that people across our community have invested $150 million, Sarah, into a project to beautify our city, sometimes you can't see all of the ramifications or the ripple effect of your project. And so for you to go over there and work with Bonnet Springs Park Board, and I'd like for my colleague, Commissioner McCarley, to also talk because she served on that board, to work with the park founders, to work with May Manor because you've seen the distress that they've faced, just to really take that comprehensive approach is just so valuable to our city. And I just can't say thank you enough because I'd like to see more of that. When we go after these grants, often you need to have a partnership and a collaborative effort between your private sector, your nonprofit partners, and also our government. So this is a really big deal, and I just really wanted to say thank you so much. And also I want to hear also from my colleague who sits on the Bonnet Springs Park Board, which I thank you for that service, because then you're able to make sure, there's that synergy with the city as well.
I think Commissioner Reed had a comment really quick or a question, and I'll wrap
And
up.
thank you for being here. And I think you probably answered several of my questions. I was confirm. You initially said it's going to stop, or the drain will stop around Wabash, but then now you said it's going to continue all the way to Hillsborough River.
Our actual construction footprint is up to Wabash, But because we'll be alleviating flood issues between Brunel Parkway and Wabash, that will have a ripple effect downstream.
So that's in the Hillsborough River drainage?
Eventually, that drainage goes into Itchepakasassa Creek, and there's mobile homes there. They're not, actually not in our area, but they experience flooding as well. So if we're able to alleviate flooding upstream, it will have that ripple effect downstream. And then Itchepakasassa Creek eventually goes into Hillsborough River, which eventually goes into Tampa Bay. So even overarching, when we presented this application for the grant, it's even thought that this will have an effect on water quality in Tampa Bay. And
Because I know when they have the heavy rain, Walker Road's underwater a lot of times. And will this be similar to what we do at Holland Brook, where they're going to do a drawdown, and then do we have a place to store the muck, or is that going to be something we're going to do on Bonnet Springs? You say that's the staging area or something like that?
that's part of the feasibility and constructability studies, where we're going to have to look at those alternatives of where we're going to be able to put the muck. Originally, when we put this grant together, Bonnet Springs Park was just, starting to be constructed. And originally, we had thought we would be able to bring it to Bonnet Springs Park, but now that the park is constructed, we don't really have that opportunity any longer. One of the thoughts is that maybe we can use it to construct littoral shelf around the perimeter of the park, the lake, so that we can do some replanting there and stabilize the shoreline. It remains to be seen, but we will figure it out.
I know we haven't received those funds yet. They're kind of sitting in a area we draw from that.
The funds we've been released to use the funds for Phase 1, which is the constructability, feasibility, environmental studies, and that's about $6 million. And once that's complete, we'll get the go-ahead to access funds for the permitting and the design, and once those are approved, we'll get the access to the remaining.
I was just wondering, obviously, as we see our projects cost continues to go up, $43 million sounds like a lot of money now, but in 6 years, we'll probably blow through that pretty quick. But I was just wondering if there's any interest factor or something like that we're going to benefit of, or that's state money, here's our lump sum, that's all we get, unless we get more down the road for additional benefits that may be required.
Correct. We don't get access to the interest money. I think the state retains that. However, we've had discussions with them that, we put this grant application together in 2020, and as we all know, since the pandemic, costs have gone up significantly. So everyone is aware that we may need more funding. And they have promised to work with us to help identify funding if and when we need it. Doesn't guarantee we will get it, but they will help us to apply for, and hopefully will advocate for us.
The Hillsborough Drainage Basin area, where does the Blackwater Creek come in on that? North somewhere?
Yes, north, and it does go into Hillsborough River, but it's north of Lake Gibson, north and west of Lake Gibson.
And just thank you, Commissioner Madden, and thank you all for the questions. Just to give a historic purview of this is the Bonnet Springs team came to the city and said there is this grant that's available through HUD that has to get filtered through the Department of Economic Opportunity at the state of Florida level. And so they worked their channels to lobby DEO and talk about how do we do this, and we worked with AECOM, and then our city, Lori Commissioner Madden brought it up, but Heath and Lori and that team really, we were trying to figure out ways, and they just had a Herculean effort to figure out a way to help with Bonnet Springs, because that spring that is fed, there's runoff that comes from Memorial and Kathleen Road that comes down into the park, but there is a regress, or it's really high on one side of the park, just to speak plainly, and then it goes very, very low into the spring. And the spring was catching all of this garbage and trash. And actually, Lake Bonnet was a lake in disrepair until this was purchased by the private investors who have, seen the ability to create this 162-acre park in the middle of downtown, basically, and utilize that land for good and for public service. And so they they caught all the garbage, and then they did do the $9 million. The park founders did the $9 million of really trying to work and get it cleaned up. And then we realized that lake, since there's no public access to that lake, that it was never on our list of hurting lakes or ill lakes. And so it never got pushed up to the top to where the state gives us those 5 to 7 to work on every year. So this really highlighted how bad that lake was. And I think an effort of saying, how does it impact that surrounding community? So it's not, I think sometimes we look at Bonnet Springs Park and it's a wonderful philanthropic gift to the city of Lakeland that a lot of people have worked on, but it also has a ripple effect, no pun intended, to that surrounding area of how can we make that lake healthier? How can we work with the city? How can we get the state to fund it? And one of the reasons that funding came through DEO is because it does go into the Hillsborough River and then ultimately into Tampa Bay. So that was a big selling point and a linchpin, I think, for the governor to really look at what this project was and know that it has an impact downstream, that it's not just exclusive to Lakeland. It's not only serving the Lakeland community, it serves Florida at large. So I think that really helped. But to Commissioner Madden's point, and Lori, we've done this privately and publicly many, many times, she really has led this effort and worked so cohesively with the team at the park to figure out how to do this. And just for the public to understand, when I mentioned the glacial pace of government at our agenda study on Friday, it's not in regard to the city of Lakeland. The glacial pace of government happens at the federal and state level. We're more nimble. We're able to do things quickly here and be reactionary and responsive to our community at large. And I think this is one effort that has shown that our team here at the city of Lakeland was like, how do we help and how do we participate and how do we make this a group effort and leverage those private dollars with public dollars? But we got that grant. We started working on it in 2020, and they kept moving the goalposts, like on when the application was due. So our team was working really diligently to get that application in. It continued to meet. I think we've had 5 different grant staff people on the state level that has elongated the process even further. So we're 3 years into a process that we should technically be about 18 months into. So to your point, I hope the state is listening and is very aware of the timing of this and how our increase of costs are going up, and I hope that they'll be responsive. I think they will be, and I think we have great partners at the park who will help leverage any kind of tactics and any kind of connection we can do with some of our delegation to make sure that they're responsive to our needs, since we've been very patient in working with them to get these state dollars in here that filter from the federal government. So kudos to you guys. It's a very, Commissioner Simmons, thank you for asking the question, because there's a lot more to it than what we typically talk about. We're at this point working on a novel with regard to this project, and we haven't even started the first check signing yet. So thank you for all you do. But we have a motion on the floor and a second to approve this agreement.
I'd also, if I
Yes,
may,
sir.
like to thank you for the background and the history of the grant. And $43 million, that's quite a bit. How does that rank among grants that we receive, City Manager Shiraz?
I don't, Mike, would you have any perspective on in comparison to other grants?
But I think
That's one of the largest that I can think of in recent history.
It was the largest in that round of grants made. When did we get it? 2021, April 2021?
Yes. And
It
it
was
was
announced.
nearly 50% of the money that was available.
Yeah, so we got a huge, huge chunk of it. We were pleasantly surprised that we got that much.
Yes, yes. Because
Congratulations, by the way, to the team for such an effort.
Mayor Pro Tem, if I may, I think I failed to mention the ranking of the firms, and so the first ranked firm on this item is AECOM, that was mentioned a moment ago. Geosyntec ranked number 2, Environmental Science Associates number 3, and RES Environmental Operating Company number 4. So again, that would be the order that we would negotiate with the various different firms.
Awesome, thank you. Any further discussion from the commission? Any from the audience? Seeing none, this too is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Carries unanimously. Thank you, Lori. All right, City Manager, that that was a long time for item A, I'm sorry. So
No,
item
that's
B.
great. Well, and if I may, let me also just comment, that partnership continues. We just recently, in the last few weeks, received a request from Bonnet Springs Park for the city to utilize our Vector truck equipment to come out and clean the structure that Commissioner McCarley referred to, that cleans out the debris as the water flows into the lake and into the spring itself. And so Palmer and the city attorney's office did some work to put together an agreement that would indemnify the city, but we will now be going out on a recurring basis to clean that structure and assist with the park. The next item that I have is a task authorization with GeoSyntech Consultants. This is for Lake Mirror Sediment Treatment Study. Lake Mirror is one of the priority lakes within the city of Lakeland, which has a current regulatory mandate requiring the reduction of nutrients. DEP has placed Lake Mirror on the verified impaired waters list due to the documented eutrophic conditions, an over-enrichment of a body of water by nutrients which promote excessive aquatic plant growth and is detrimental to aquatic life. Previous studies indicate the lake sediments are a main source of excessive nutrients. This two-phase sediment treatment study will evaluate various sediment treatment options to reduce internal nutrient loads from sediment recycling and improve surface water quality. Phase 1 will evaluate the effectiveness of 3 different nutrient sediment treatment products in a laboratory. Phase 2 will then evaluate different treatment dosings using the product determined to be the most effective during that Phase 1 study. The major elements of the sediment treatment study include the compilation and review of previously collected sediment and water quality laboratory analytical data, collection of core samples of unconsolidated sediments and surface water samples for lab analysis of physical and chemical characteristics during Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the project. Transfer of the core sediment and surface water samples to an analytical laboratory to complete column testing of sediment and surface water with 3 different sediment nutrient reduction products will be completed during the Phase 1 testing. Columns will be sampled periodically over the course of the study to evaluate nutrient release potential from the sediments. And at the end of Phase 1, the product exhibiting the lowest nutrient release potential will be selected for the Phase 2 testing. Column testing during Phase 2 of the study will consist of applying various doses of the product and periodic sampling to evaluate nutrient release potential differences and identify the optimal application dose of the selected product. There will be a summarization and analysis of the data, including recommendations for the selected sediment treatment product and the dosing as described. Preparation and submittal of a draft and then final technical memo that synthesizes all of the data resulting and including recommendations for the selected sediment treatment product and dosing requirements. The city will use the results of this sediment treatment study in planning and permitting Lake Mirror sediment treatment and lake restoration projects. GeoSyntech Consultants is an engineering firm that the city has on a continuing services contract with the Lakes and Watershed Management Services. Funding for the project in the not-to-exceed amount of $245,677.70 is provided in the fiscal year 23 Stormwater Capital Improvement Plan. Staff recommends the authorization of the appropriate city officials to execute the task authorization with GeoSyntech Consulting for Lake Mirror sediment treatment study as presented.
A motion?
Move to approve.
And a second?
We have a motion and a second. Discussion by commission. Commissioner Reed.
Is Lori still here?
She's still here. And Lori, we talked about this on Friday a little bit too, but there might be a couple questions. Go ahead, Commissioner Reed.
Has this lake ever been, I guess, unification process ever been implied against this at any one point? I know Lake Parker's done stuff years and years ago in the 60s, and we did Hollingworth in the 1900s, and then some different other lakes in here. But has anything ever been done to this lake? Is this primarily because of spraying and sediment just settling, or is it from everything else that bleeds into the lake?
Lori Smith, Manager, Lakes and Stormwater. It's a combination of everything. That's a great question. So Lake Morton and Lake Mirror most recently, about a year and a half ago, were identified by the DEP as impaired waters and put on the impaired waters list. So that's what triggers us to start doing more work. Even though we do sample the lake on a quarterly basis and we manage vegetation in the lake and we clean trash out of the lake, this triggered a higher level of having to address issues in the lake. So we started off with a study. So because they're pretty similar, we're doing Lake Mirror and Morton kind of the same time and doing the same type of scope of work. So we've looked at stormwater inputs into both those lakes and identified a few locations where we can do stormwater treatment. And we're in the process now of looking at design and permitting for those. We've also done some preliminary testing of sediment and found that sediment is issues in both of those lakes. So you may recall back in May, we brought this exact same scope of work to you for Lake Morton, and that was approved, and we've issued a purchase order to Geosyntec to begin that work. So we're going to do the exact same scope of work over here at Lake Morton. One of the things that we will need to do is address those sediments. So the purpose of this scope is to evaluate the thickness of the sediment, how much is in there, how much nutrient content is in that sediment, and then which of those potential products that we might be able to use is the right one and what the right dose is. So this will help us to hopefully sequester those sediment, nutrients in the sediment and improve the water quality in the lake. And we're doing this under a plan, step by step. We communicate with DEP, what we're doing, what we found, this is what we think next. They approve our next step and say, yes, we agree with that. So we're basically following a plan with DEP to address nutrient impairment in both of these lakes.
Do these chemicals, we're probably not going to do dredging in those lakes, but we may have to. But I'm just wondering if these chemicals, they solidify the sediment, make it more of a harder base, and then you can pull the nutrients out of the water?
What they do is, as they disperse in the lake, they actually capture nutrients in the water column and settle down to the bottom of the lake. And then they dissolve a little bit into the top, several inches in the sediment and kind of form a barrier. And as nutrients try to flux out of the sediment, it actually binds to those nutrients and prevents it from dispersing into the water column.
At this point, we don't know the depth of the sediment for Bonnet Springs or the Lake Mirror, do we?
We don't know Lake Mirror, Lake Morton. We need to test that. We know that there's mucky sediments down there. We just don't know the exact aerial extent and how deep they are. But Bonnet, we had a really good idea back in 2018. We're going to have to re-look at that because there's been a little bit more input into the lake, but we had up to 28 feet of sediment in Lake Bonnet on the eastern side of the lake.
I've mainly asked these questions for the citizens, and my own personal knowledge as well. So
Good question.
Thank you very much.
Just really quick, Commissioner Music has a question, but Commissioner Madden just looked at me with the 28 feet. So when Bonnet Springs dredged and created their own lagoon, did that take any of the pressure off of Lake Bonnet or not really?
That's hard to say. I mean, because I think some of that where they excavated out that lagoon, it's actually almost in contact with the lake. It's so close to the lake that it stays at the water level of the lake that there's probably some connection there through that wetland area.
Commissioner Music.
28 feet. Has there been a situation where if the DEP sends, does some testing, does a notification, says, hey, you guys got to address this, and then we do our own follow-up testing and we're not on the same page? I mean, is it a done deal once they say, hey, here's some lakes, you've got to address them?
Pretty much so. And we do actually the testing ourselves. DEP very rarely goes out and tests. So we, as part of following the regulations of the state, we need to do ambient water quality monitoring in our lakes. And so every quarter, it's either us or Polk County. We share the responsibility. collect those samples, have them analyzed, and we're required to submit them to the state.
By the time we send those to the state, the DEP, we know, because we've done the analysis, we know that, okay, we're probably going to get flagged on this just from our own testing.
Yeah, it's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
They've recently kind of changed the way they look at the lakes, and if you have 3 years of results that show that you are above that nutrient content that's allowed in the lake, they will put you on the impaired water list. And once you're on that list, they rank you from low to high, and at one point, you will be given a mandate. Either it's a TMDL, total maximum daily load, if it's stormwater input, or we negotiate a nutrient reduction plan if it's more in-lake issues, which is Morton and Mirror both have the NRPs.
Other questions? Commissioner Madden?
Thank you, Lori. So when we're going through these studies, certainly we're looking to experts to tell us the best mitigation projects. I know that at one of our meetings recently, you were talking about this kind of an aerator that we've tried, and it seemed to be successive, but maybe too small for the lake. Do you feel confident that when we're working with the EPA, they're looking at the very best practices, even some of this innovation and emerging technology? Or like if you and your team were like, man, I really wish we could do like we do at Lake Wire and do hydrilla plus the blind carp, or whatever it is that you feel strongly about having seen success, are you able to kind of work with their recommendations, or do you just have to do exactly what they say?
Typically, they will ask us, what do you think you need to do? So it's pretty much us coming to them and saying, this is what the steps we're going to take to meet what you're asking us to do. And they may or may not agree or kind of guide us in another direction. Using these amendments, even though you may have heard of alum treatment, that's been around for decades. That's what we did in Lake Hollingsworth after we dredged Lake Hollingsworth. We put an alum treatment in. There's a whole new crop of different types of these amendments now that are thought to work better, but it's still innovative and emerging technology. So that's another reason why we're doing this study, is to look at these new type of amendments that have been shown to work in other locations, but have not yet been used here in Central Florida. And at that point, our hope is to go back to DEP and get an innovative grant to do the actual cleanup of the lake using one of these amendments.
I'm hopeful that we have a lot of R&D going into breakthrough technology, because certainly with our peninsula, and even just the effects that we're seeing along the coast, it just seems like it's dire that we have new solutions on keeping our lakes clean and all of our waterways. So thank you for your work.
Commissioner Reed?
Thank you. And of course, one observation, and I make it, I'm sure everybody has too, but we look at the lakes in Winter Haven and some of the other lakes that seem cleaner but I think the primary reason that our lakes are probably dirtier, I guess is a better word for it, is when our fathers in the city of Lakeland developed Lakeland, they took in consideration Lake Hollingsworth, Parker, Bonnie, Mira, Morton, and Lake Wire, where they wanted the citizens to use the entire lake. So you don't see houses on these lakes like other places. So the public has access to these lakes versus for everybody. It's everybody's observation point of like that, as opposed to being development on these lakes. And so with that in place, it's kind of stifled some of it's impeded the runoff going into these lakes more so than other places. But the citizens do have a greater visibility component for the city and stuff. But I just want to make that observation. And of course, again, that's up to us to rectify the past mistakes that have been made. So hopefully we can find some financing, or when the lakes fees comes back up, you'll beg for a little bit more money or something like that.
Any other questions or comments from commission? Any from the audience? Seeing none, this is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And you have a verbal. Thank you,
Yes.
Lori.
Thank you. Just Friday night, as you're aware, was a very unplanned late night for many. on our city staff, as we had, a very uncommon emergency event where we had a train engine, derail, and some cars that were involved in that, and passengers on the train. And so, we had a lot of city staff that after going home at the end of a long week had to come back. And so on scene, we had our emergency manager, Ruben Garcia. Many of you know has been with us now for a few months in that emergency manager's role. Also on site, we had Assistant Fire Chief Mike Williams. We had Assistant Police Chief Stephen Pacheco, and they were managing the scene there along with others from Lakeland Fire Department and Lakeland Police Department. That resulted in the need to transport those passengers to a safe haven until other arrangements could be made for them to continue on in their travels through Amtrak. And so the request was made that they be taken to the RP Funding Center. Now, it just so happens that Friday night at the RP Funding Center, we had a sold-out event in the arena, so it was extremely busy. But then our interim RP Funding Center Director, Stephen Colazzo, and his staff there were able to receive those passengers, were able to, put them in a safe environment, allow them some time to just calm down, provide some refreshments to them, and then coordinate with the Amtrak officials to have those passengers taken from the RP Funding Center and relocated by bus. And all of that took until about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, Saturday morning. And so our staff just did a tremendous job in a very unique situation that you don't often see, where you have a train derail in your community. And I just think that that says an awful lot about the folks that we have serving in those capacities. And when you think about the city's performance, during Hurricane Ian and how quickly the community was restored, and then you think about even something as uncommon as a train derailing in your community, that just goes a lot to say that the city is prepared to protect this community in an emergency event. And so I just want to thank staff and congratulate them on what was a very well-organized response that could not, of course, have been planned on a late Friday night.
Thank you for highlighting that. Yeah. We appreciate.
Just one question, if I may.
Yes.
There were no fatalities, were there? Were there any serious injuries related to that accident?
None that I'm aware of. I had been given 2 different reports that there were, initially I was told 5, then I was told 7 that were transported, but there was nothing that was life-threatening, and the injuries, I was told, appeared to be relatively minor. Now, what happened to those patients once they were at the hospital, I'm not sure of that.
Thank you. We know we have a wonderful team here at the City of Lakeland, and they shine bright in crisis situations, and we hate the crises, but we're proud of how they respond and how well they take care of people in our community, whether they're visiting or whether they live here full-time. So we really appreciate that. Thank you for bringing us up to speed on that. We'll now move to item 6A1, first reading from the city attorney.
Thank you, Commissioner. One ordinance for first reading. This will be read by title only this morning, and we'll come back for a public hearing and consideration of adoption on August 7th. That is proposed ordinance number 23-027, an ordinance relating to the Lakeland Area Mass Transit District, making findings, approving the inclusion of certain lands located within the city of Lakeland within the boundaries of the Lakeland Area Mass Transit District, providing for severability, providing an effective date. Again, that'll come back for a public hearing, consideration of adoption on August 7th. One miscellaneous item for consideration this morning by the commission, and that is a financial advisor services agreement with PFM Financial Advisors. Our current financial advising firm, RBC Capital Markets, is no longer servicing municipal clients. We utilize financial advising services particularly when we're issuing bonds and other debt. They provide a number of services to the city, including just advice on the structuring and timing of bond transactions issues, marketing of the bond issues to underwriters, and just generally seeking to maximize the city's ratings and minimize our interest rates. So it's important that we have a financial advising firm in place, particularly given that we have an upcoming bond issue for Lakeland Electric in the fall. Seminole County just recently underwent an RFP for financial advising services and selected PFM Financial Advisors. We took a look at what Seminole County did and the contract that they reached with PFM, and have concluded that that is a competitive contract, and so we're recommending that we piggyback on that. Under the attached agreement to the agenda, it's a 5-year term with 2 one-year renewal options. The city may terminate the agreement at any time, and also it's a non-exclusive agreement so that we could utilize another financial advising firm if we felt that that was in the city's best interest. PFM's rates under this proposed contract are either at or below the rates that we're currently paying to RBC Capital. Just as an example, the fee for a $100 million bond issue would be $71,000. So the way it works is they're paid a certain amount based on the amount of the bonds that we're issuing. They're paid out of the closing proceeds. It's simply just included as one of the costs, folded into the cost of the bond transaction. So we're recommending that the city commission approve the contract with PFM Financial Advisors. And happy to answer any questions you have, and Mike Bozark can answer questions as well.
Thank you. Do we have a motion?
Move for approval. Move for approval.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Any questions? We talked about this a little bit on Friday. Commissioner Reed.
Mike, when we piggyback on a RFP from some other areas, and we select that group, are they obligated to take on us as a client per se, even though Seminole County may be asking for a $200 million bond, we may want a $50 million bond. Are they obligated to, if they do an RFP and we said we want you to do it too, are they obligated, or is that something that you negotiate different?
Piggyback, and Palmer, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but piggybacking just allows us to skip the RFP process. You still have to negotiate with those folks, right?
Go through the.
Oh, sure, right. It just we make sure that the process that we look at from whomever may have gone through that process already, we want to make sure that they've been diligent in their steps, and obviously between Jeff and purchasing, they felt that what Seminole County had done was very prudent, and for that reason, they were willing to reach out to PFM and negotiate with them.
Basically, it saves us a vetting process of some sort.
Sure, I mean,
Okay.
that's something that's written into the law that allows for that step if we find that somebody had recently done that same step.
They don't necessarily have to accept us per se, do we?
Except that they are entering into an agreement with us now,
Right.
so yes, they are agreeing to provide us those services if we ask for them.
But they don't have to, is your question. I mean, you have to still negotiate with them, right? Yeah.
And there is one other variation, or at least one, Commissioner, where sometimes you will hear us refer to statewide contracts. We've heard that when we've talked about vehicles before. And so you've got a vehicle dealer who has agreed that for this price and that package, they will make that available to any other, within the state. And in that case, they are obligated to it.
Any other questions? Any questions from the audience? This is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We don't have a report from the finance director this morning, but we do have utility number.
So we have one ordinance for first reading related to Lakeland Electric, and that is proposed ordinance number 23-028, an ordinance relating to the electric utility, providing for availability of service and conditions thereof, establishing rate classifications, removing determination of billing demand charges for certain rate classes, establishing rates for electric service by the city of Lakeland, establishing a surcharge for customers receiving service outside the corporate limits of the city of Lakeland, establishing general provisions, establishing a methodology to impose a fuel charge, providing rates and general provisions for private area lighting, providing for an environmental compliance cost charge, modifying customer participation in the solar hot water program, providing general provisions of medically essential service for residential customers, establishing a demand charge for existing customers with solar systems after January 1st, 2025, providing an economic development rider for qualified customers, providing rates for miscellaneous fees and charges, establishing a rate increase sufficient to sustain a financially self-supporting electric utility, repealing ordinance 5975, providing definitions, making findings, providing for severability, providing an effective date. Just to sum all that up, I mean, what this is doing is increasing the rates across the board from the projected 2.25%, that was the outcome of the initial rate study, to 3.5%. That 3.5% would apply for the upcoming fiscal year, October 1st, 2023 to September 30th, 2024. And unless things change between now and September 30th, 2024, the rates would then go back to that the 2.25% that was the result of the rate study. But this is just first reading of that ordinance. This will come back for second reading and consideration of adoption on August 7th.
Thank you. Item C1 under miscellaneous.
Morning, Ramona Siriani for the City Attorney's Office. The first item that we have under the utility portion of the agenda is an agreement with Pike Electric LLC. This is for electrical distribution construction services for Lakeland Electric's energy delivery operations. This is a contract to help supplement Lakeland Electric's existing internal crew capacity. They don't have the employee capacity to do that. These services involve replacement of poles, replacement of overhead pole structures, including their maintenance, also related underground construction and maintenance, the lighting installation with that, and this particular contract also will cover emergency restoration from storm occurrences on a 24/7 basis and as needed. The city's purchasing department went out for an RFP back in May of this year. We had a number of responses. 5 companies were provided responses and bids. Pike Electric LLC was selected as the most responsible bidder that had the lowest price. The initial contract term will be for a 3-year period, commencing July 17th upon City Commission approval. There are 2 additional 1-year options of renewal included. Pricing will remain firm for the first year of the initial term. Thereafter, all the subsequent years will be subject to 3%, maximum of 3% per year adjustment. Pursuant to the agreement, Pike will provide 2 4-person crews and as well as the necessary equipment for the replacement of the poles over the next 3 years, in addition to providing that 24/7 backup support for storm restoration. The total estimated cost of the work for the initial contract period is $2.8 million per year. That is included in Lakeland Electric's FY 23 and 24 budgets. And we would ask for your favorable approval.
For approval?
A motion and a second. Discussion from commission. Yes, Commissioner Simmons.
The rate increases, the 3%, are they automatic, or do we negotiate with that percent?
They're maximum up to 3%. I mean, it's feasible that they wouldn't request a price increase, but with the way we've seen services and supplies, it's likely, but we wanted to make sure to ensure that we had a cap in the contract, so they cannot exceed 3% per year.
Would we negotiate with them for that up to 3%, or would they?
Correct, for any renewal options. And again, a renewal option would be subject to mutual written agreement of the parties. We would have to agree to want to renew the contract with Pike.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Any questions from the audience? Seeing none, this is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. C2.
Next item that we have is an agreement with the Calvert Company LLC. This is for the purchase of 4 non-segregated bus duct runs for the McIntosh Rice project. These are conductors and joints and insulated supports contained in a metal enclosure, and these will actually serve the purpose of connecting the generator step-up transformer to the medium voltage switchgear, which will carry power between the generators and the switchgear, as well as carry 480 volt power between the low voltage side of the service station transformers and the low voltage switchgear. The purchasing department in March went out for a bid, and the city received responses from 3 contractors. The initial low bid price was from Crown Electric. However, upon evaluation by city staff as well as our consulting engineer, Sargent and Lundy, for the project, it was determined that the pricing was actually higher for Crown as it related to structural steel and freight costs. And there were some issues, technical issues with its bid related to the arrangement of equipment, which wasn't something that the city looked at the Calvert Company's bid and found that more favorable. And ultimately, the Calvert Company was determined to be the low bidder, as well as in looking at the bid. Sargent and Lundy and city staff also went forward to include some additional work that was part of this whole project, which was to support the ductwork, additional freight costs, as well as field services guidance during the installation process. The installation will occur by Rayco Industrial, which was the contractor that was selected to do the above-ground contractor for the Rice project that the commission previously approved back in March of this year. So those additional requested features increased Calvert's initial bid by an amount of $48,532, bringing the total cost of the work, including the additional features, to $416,011. That is included, the total cost is included in the Lakeland Electric budget for the Rice project that was previously approved by the City Commission and also has been bonded. And we would ask for your favorable approval for this purchase.
Move to approve.
We have a motion, do we have a second? And a second by Commissioner Music. Any questions or comments? Yes, Commissioner Reed.
Thank you. And Ramona, you may not be able to answer this question. What's the KV stand for? Is that kilovolt?
I believe so.
What constitutes, this is a medium switch, that's a 13.8 million, I guess, and then what could constitute a high, what would constitute a low?
I'll let Dave Holdner answer that. There's a reason I do legal work and not the engineering and science and mathematical part of it.
That's a good question. David Holdner, Power Production Project Manager. Low voltage is anything under 5 kV, and then you get into medium voltage when you get up to 22 kV in that range, and then above that it becomes high voltage, and kV is kilovolts.
Thank you. I just saw that, and I know one was low, one was medium. I had no idea what the threshold was for that.
The low side is just 480 volt. The high side is 13,800 volts. As it comes to the secondary of the transformer, then out of the transformer, it go to the substation voltages of 69,000.
Do any of our plants have bigger than that?
Yeah. The Unit 5 puts out a 22 kV instead of the 13.8. There's many plants at other places that put out at 23, but then obviously our substations operate at 230, 69 kV and things like that.
Questions? Seeing none, any questions or comments from the audience? This too is a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. Thank you all so much. Thanks, Dave. Now we come into the audience portion of our agenda meeting. So if anyone would like to approach the commission, they have 5 minutes. You'll just state your name and your address. Seeing none, that'll take us to the mayor and members of city commission comments.
I've
Yes,
got one.
Commissioner Simmons.
Yes, on, last Friday, we had the workshop regarding the transportation. And I'm just curious as to what we need to do. I certainly endorse getting the half-cent sales tax in order to come up with the infrastructure that we need for the next 20 years regarding our roads improvements. What is that the city commission has to do if we were to endorse that effort?
Well, I think it's twofold, and I'll look to Palmer too, but I know initially what Commissioner Lindsay was asking us to do, since he was speaking as a private citizen, is the county commission would have to put that on the ballot. So we could encourage them to do so either individually, which I think would be very important to reach out to our county commissioners individually. But if we wanted to do it collectively, we would do a resolution, I would think, Palmer. So I don't know if you want to talk about
I
that.
think you stated it perfectly. It's the county commission that would have to vote to put that on the ballot for a referendum, and the city commission simply expresses its support either individually or collectively through a resolution.
I know in a meeting that the city managers around the county had with Commissioner Lindsay, there was some discussion about the county needing to make that decision probably in late December to start the process in early January. So I think that's probably the timeline that we're looking at would be sometime between now and probably December, if the commission either individually or as a body, wants to indicate your preference.
We would have to wait first for the county commission to make that election, is that right?
We could encourage them independently ourselves or collectively as a body.
Okay,
Which I
prior
would-
to that date.
Right, prior to that date.
And I think, Commissioner, if I understand your question, but it would be the county who then makes the decision to move forward
Right.
with a ballot initiative to adopt.
Commissioner Lindsay is asking us for our support either independently as individuals and members of the county commission or collectively. So,
Really, it was George Lindsay who was asking, not.
right, not
Yeah.
Commissioner Wright.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, Commissioner Reed.
Sarah, would you mind go ahead and kind of briefly regurgitate what George said on Friday? Give us so the citizens know how and I know what we're talking about.
So, some public context. So George Lindsay, who serves as a commissioner of the Board of County Commissioners, and he is in his last term. Let me try to be as succinct as possible. So in an effort to work collectively on maintaining our roads and growing our capacity of roads throughout Polk County, there are very limited revenue streams. So this proposal is a proposed county transportation sales tax referendum that could be on the ballot for a half cent. With that half cent of sales tax, which would begin January 1, 2025, correct? At midnight, it would start being collected. It would be sales tax. Anything that is eligible for sales tax would collect that half cent, half of a penny, and it would run for 20 years. And so then it would end December 31 of 2045, right? Or December 1 of 2044. I think, because then it would be collective. So it would be sunsetted. So in essence, what it is, it's a stopgap to provide an additional revenue stream that supersedes the gas tax. As we know, the gas tax that comes to us through the state of Florida is limited more these days in that all of our cars are more efficient, and it's also not enough really to maintain our roads that we have here or build extra capacity. One of the critical components of this is just like in any government funding entity, there are limitations to how money can be spent. Our impact fees that come in through the city of Lakeland can only be spent on specific items. Our ad valorem can only be spent on specific items. Through our budgeting process, anything for Lakeland Electric has to be spent on Lakeland Electric, and so on. So this would be something that's very specific for capacity building throughout Polk County. We've seen such a increase in our population, and we're having a hard time keeping up with even getting our roads to the point where they are usable. There is a system at play in the state and in the county with failing roads and failing lane miles, which means that a road doesn't work. It doesn't mean that you sit at a stoplight a little bit longer than necessary because of volume of traffic. What it means is that the road is not working to its best ability. So if you look at a road, for instance, like George Jenkins Boulevard, that it could be considered a failing road. And so there is no money right now to build capacity on that road, either locally through our own general funds or collectively from the county, because the county has, I don't know how many hundreds of miles of roads throughout, thousands of miles of roads throughout. But what I do know is if we don't find a revenue stream that helps support the capacity builds that we require, then we're going to continue to see more and more of our roads fail, and more of them have not be able to be maintained or even increase the size and spectrum of what we have and concurrency. Does that make sense? Is that right? Does that help? Or did I make it worse?
Yes, and that doesn't just apply to gasoline, that applies to all sales, basically, right?
Yes, that applies to all sales.
Right.
Anything that has a
And
sales
the
tax.
only other component I would suggest is the city gets their share, everybody gets their own part of it.
So historically, in 2014, there was a My Ride, My Roads initiative that was on the ballot that failed. And that at the time was looking at public transit in addition to capacity building and roads and sidewalks. And this would also be roads, sidewalks, it would be all of infrastructure surrounding transport, and for people getting from one place to another. And so that failed, and this initiative from Mr. Lindsay has a broader breadth, and we learned a lot from that 2014 failure of the sales tax. It wasn't sunsetted, it wasn't a finite amount of time, and it also didn't have specific projects. So this would give municipalities, there are 17 municipalities in Polk County, it would give them the opportunity to say, these are the projects that we're looking for. The county would collect that money and then distribute it to the individual municipalities. And for the city of Lakeland specifically, this could run about $200 million over the course. Or would that be annually? It'd be over the course. Yeah, over the course of the 20 years. So that would be a lot of money. And here's why it's also important, is it helps us, just like we were talking about with Bonnet Springs earlier, it gives us more leverage with regard to the Florida Department of Transportation, the state, and the federal government, that we can show up with money in our hands that we have collected and say, we can do this project, and then they can come alongside of us. One of the things that we found so successful out at Lakeland Linder Airport is that partnership between the FAA and the DOT, and so there's skin in the game from the city, and then it helps build those contracts alongside so we can be as successful as we've been out there. This is the same concept except with a sales tax component as the revenue stream.
Well done.
Okay. I
I
get
think
nervous when you do
I think
that.
one of the important items is what you said last, is us having money to be able to help kickstart some of these things, show the federal or state government the seriousness and our willingness to put some in as well. So that's a big part of that.
So instead of handing an empty hand out to those entities, we could come, with participation. And it helps us get shovel ready in developing our roads and doing new initiatives, or, building capacity on our existing road work system. So, any other questions about that? I'll try my best. Other comments? Yes, Commissioner Madden.
He did reference why bonding was not an option. I'm looking at Mr. Brossart. I know in the past you've told us that in order to bond, it needs a direct revenue stream to be able to pay for the bond payments. Would this not constitute a direct revenue stream if they wanted to do things faster instead of waiting, on some of the projects, or take advantage of pooling some projects together? Is it only not a possibility now? With this, would it be a possibility for the county?
The challenge with initiating a bond for a road project is, yes, one, you have to guarantee how you're going to pay it back, whether it's a covenant to budget appropriate, which simply means we promise that we're going to budget for this debt service annually. The bigger challenge is meeting the spend down requirements of those bonds, because most road projects are not going to get completed within the 24 months if it's a interest. You're not paying taxes on those borrowings. So if it's a tax exempt deal, so that's the biggest challenge associated with it. Okay.
I think maybe one of the other difficulties there could be that, and none of this is set in stone, it's all subject to change as we move forward, but the way it's been presented, at least my understanding is that the county would have those funds, and they would have a proportionate share for each city, which I do think is one of the good features, is that Lakeland would have our proportionate share. However, Lakeland would have to apply for those funds, even in our proportionate share, to then come down for the projects that we want to fund. And so we don't have direct control of those funds. We have to apply for the county, even though we have our proportionate share allocated.
Commissioner Reed.
And one other point, again, I guess the point they're struggling with most is whether we ask for a half cent, which would generate 200 million versus 0.75% with 300 million, or 1%, 1 cent sales tax, which would give us $400 million. I know that's in question, but they didn't want to ask for too much to make sure some's better than nothing per se.
Well, the 1 cent would make us the highest sales tax in the state of Florida. So being at a half cent, that puts us with 22 other counties. So out of the 67, it's a little more than a third. So, or right around a third. Yes.
I think if I remember correctly, too, you can only do it in half-cent increments as
Yeah.
well.
Right.
So you
Yeah,
can't
you
do
can't
it
do it three-quarters.
three-quarters. I think it's
Yeah.
got to either be a half cent or
Or
a
a
full
whole.
cent. Yeah.
And really, and I think one of the things that Mr. Lindsay would discuss is learning so much from that 2014 initiative, ballot initiative, is that half cent, we have to mitigate what the public is willing to consider and what private industry is willing to consider, because it definitely is, although it's equitable from some perspectives of that would hit visitors, and it would be people who are in and out of Polk County would pay that sales tax, as well as the people who live here. So it would spread it across, but we're trying to be as cognizant as possible. I mean, we're really working in an environment where we're seeing some, recession, and we want to be mindful of what citizens would incur. But it is similar. One of the arguments against it is, if I don't, not an argument against it, but a topic that Commissioner Madden brought up on Friday with regard to, well, if I'm riding my bike or if I'm walking to work, why would I want to, have to do a sales tax? It's very similar to schools. It's very similar to a lot of things that we pay for in our tax bill individually as homeowners and business owners that, even if your kids aren't in school, you're still paying for the school system. So it's a similar method in that regard, except this is a cross-cutting of anyone that comes in and out of our county. All right, any other comments by commissioners? Yes.
I was going to say that I'm going to be at the FMEA conference Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I've got some good conferences, so that'll be good. So hopefully I can take some good notes and come back and let you know.
Awesome, thank you. Commissioner Madden?
I'm so glad Mr. Music is going to the FMEA. I just can't wait to hear all your takeaways. So it goes right into my LEHI, Legislative Energy Horizon Institute. I told you all I was going to. It was at the Pacific Northwest National Lab in Richland, Washington. We were able to take an Ice Harbor hydroelectric dam tour day to see how they not only produce clean energy for 100 years that they have, but, to make sure that they're able to, at one time, it would prevent the salmon from being able to get down the river and into the Atlantic, and then also killed other fish that, fishermen relied upon. So those rivers out there, the Snake Rivers and all the rivers out there in the West that have hydro, it's amazing because it's just a huge amount of energy. And it's, naturally reoccurring, and it has no emissions. But they do have to build fish ladders and have kind of a little current area where the fish can go through. And even actually, they have retrofitted their rotors and everything to make them smoother. And so even if the salmon did get through that part of the dam, that they would make it alive. So interesting. We, were able to see all the fish make it through on the fish ladders. And so that was day one. It was 7:15 a.m. till 6 at night with classes. It's a certificated course, so they really were serious. And legislators throughout the country were there, 42 participants in our cohort. It was interesting to hear David talk about the voltage. I saw Mike say, whew, well, that is how we were every day, because it was electricity 101 through nuclear and all of the renewables, every kind of generation you can think of. And then I thought I'd just give you some fun things and not bore you, but some of the aha moments we had in our groups, we had to do a game, which our folks in Ellie would appreciate, that we had to build a generation mix at a power plant. And we had to take into consideration emissions, we had to take into consideration reliability, we had to take into consideration where we live geographically. You've heard us say that we can't, unless we did offshore potentially, but of course then, hurricanes might knock over wind turbines here. Solar's being intermittent without battery storage. So the natural gas folks were there, petroleum, the coal. One of the gentlemen in a cohort I went to college with, and he's actually of course, in Kentucky, they have a lot of coal and mostly coal. So he kind of felt like the black sheep of the event. But how important, and even a demographer was there to show that as dirty as we might think fossil fuels have been, they showed the trajectory of human life and our life expectancy and our quality of health. From before we were able to generate electricity to, where we are now, and how that just brings income and health and prosperity, to humanity because of that. So the goal was to use that same ingenuity that we got us here to help us, carbon capture or go to other emerging technology to get cleaner, instead of just, villainizing, the power generation of the past that's gotten us where we are. So I thought it was very balanced. It was there at the National Lab. The other cool thing is they had Canada there, and I kept wondering why we had these Canadian cohorts, and they said that we are so interdependent, on this same North American continent. We don't have to travel over an ocean to share things. So we have some shared transmission lines up there. And even crazy that when we first built our refineries, our big refineries to refine our oil, it was before fracking. And so the oil that we were able to get, the deep drilling, was a heavier oil. So we made all of our refineries based on that. And then as much as people think that we make so much money with oil, the margins are so small that when we developed fracking and got the shale oil, it was so much lighter that Canada built the light oil refineries. We send our light oil, shale oil, to them to refine, and they send us the heavy oil to refine here because it's too expensive to rebuild the refineries now that we have this amazing fracking and shale oil. So it's just crazy how expensive. And of course we had a big class. Mr. Brossart would love it, on financing and bonding and how you are able to build these giant power plants. And we had the nuclear folks there, and then we had representation from the small modular nuclear. Everyone's looking to actually have a viable, built, constructed SMR, and it looks like NuScale's in the lead there, but it'll still be, several years till we can see that constructed, kind of like our Rice engines are on the way, but it takes a while. And then also tomorrow, it parlays well into, so American Public Power Association is the one who sponsored me to be on this Lehigh cohort. And then tomorrow is when I do the fly-in for the PMC. So it was great to hear people from across the country, because you have to represent public power at large, coming from the hydro and seeing what they're up against, that here they're a clean energy source, but they still have environmental impacts that they have to mitigate, and they don't want to be shut down, because how are they going to replace all that energy? So they have to save the fish. Same thing with all of and you saw people from across the country, and they were in state legislator positions, Republican, Democrat, really coming together to be like, what, instead of taking a side, especially an extreme side on either side of this issue, that we need to work together, because there are big holes to fill. If we're going to go away from fossil fuels in any kind of real way, we need some emerging technology. We need to work together. We need either, share big hydroelectricity and nuclear by big transmission lines that, oh, by the way, there's no standardization. So like across the country, we can't even share across the state in some places because the transmission lines don't sync. So just really fascinating. And so tomorrow I'll be going to DC to do the fly-in, to talk to our legislators at DC about public power, be able to tell Lakeland Electric's story, to keep us to be able to have public power in general, but then also just to talk about, this energy transition. And one of the things when Cindy Clemens was giving her presentation the other day, you might not have noticed it, but every year in the last several years that I've been going to DC for APPA, we try to get commensurate tax incentives. So we don't pay tax, so we don't get tax cuts like the private IOUs. But if we're going to build clean energy, how could we get some kind of direct repayment, to be able to incentivize us to do that? So we were able to get that in the last iteration of the IRA and the IIJA. And so I wanted to, thank our legislators, because of that, we're able to get that solar, if we get that solar grant that we're talking about that Cindy presented with the housing, then, 100 homes instead of 50 homes because of that opportunity. So advocating is important for us, and the second part of the Lehigh cohort is in October in DC, and that's when I'll get to learn about my favorite subject, which is, green hydrogen and gold hydrogen and all the colors of hydrogen. But the last thing I'll say is that when you mentioned the transformers, that was one of the biggest concerns when we were talking about the grid security. Because of how, the EPA will say, well, we don't like this kind of steel, you have to change the way you make steel, and then, oh, by the way, the only person who makes the steel is in China, and then we have tariffs on China, we're not doing business with China, and so then we don't have any steel. And then they shoot up transformers across the country, and we're without a power, like they were in North Carolina. So that is one of the things we'll be advocating this week, is to make that maybe a part of the Department of Defense, to have our electric energy infrastructure components on hand and made here in America. So lots of cool stuff. I hope that wasn't too much, but I wanted to give you a little, it was like, 5 days of lots of, I'll share my notes with anybody who would like to see them.
Well, that's a great update. Thank you. I think sometimes we run out of time and we don't get a chance to do that. So thank you for reporting back. We'll expect your FMA report.
Just like that,
Yeah.
basically.
I want it to be as thorough as that. Any other comments from commissioners? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion to adjourn. And a second? All right. Thank y'all.
Hey.